Good morning and welcome to the Raw Heart and Soul podcast. This morning I've got a very special guest with me all the way from Salt Lake City in Utah. It's Christopher Jones, and I'm going to go through his bio. So Chris Jones lives in Salt Lake City, Utah with his wife Natalie and their 3 living children. Their son Mitchell Jones passed away from heart failure in 2013. He had Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, a catastrophic muscle wasting disease that is fatal. Prior to his son's passing, Chris started a Facebook page entitled Mitchell's Journey, which has since gained international attention as both a place for healing and insights on the often misunderstood world of grief and healing. Most notably, Mitchell's Journey has become a beacon of hope to many and an invitation for its readers to live a life of significance. In all of his writing and speaking, Chris shares an unparalleled view of a terminal child's experience through the medical system, then what happens on the other side of medicine, long after a patient is sent home to die. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. We're going to jump straight into this, and I've known of you for I think about 7 years, and came to me actually through a student of mine who I think followed your page, and then I saw something pop up and became very addicted to your writing and the way you traveled through grief, because I've been through that journey myself. And it was interesting that even though you were going through the depths of losing a child, which I can't imagine how that would be, but there was still so much life and so much joy and so much hope in what you were writing and the way you wrote. And that's what really appealed to me. And I think that's going to come across today with some of the questions I'm going to ask you. So I'll start, and that's, how would you describe what someone's soul purpose is? And would you describe that as being soul purpose, or would you use different language around that?
How would I describe what a soul purpose is, what somebody's soul purpose is? You know, I think a lot of that just has to do, we all have individual makeups. Some of us are introverted, and in so being, we tend to lean towards certain things, whereas other people are extroverts. And so I think a lot of that is, the answer to the question is where you feel most comfortable, where you excel. And some people just love to connect, virtually with people, and other people are really great face to face. And our soul purposes are just as unique to us as our fingerprints. But I think that the definition of that, it really just has to go down to that core question about what is it that feeds you, not physically, but emotionally and spiritually and intellectually. And if you find that you're electrified by the thing you're doing, or if you're nourished by it, then there's a high probability that's related to your soul purpose.
So would you say that you've found your soul purpose and you're living that soul purpose?
I don't know. I think I'll know at the end of my life if I've figured all of that out. But I think I'm heading there. Yeah, I think there's part of me feels like that's definitely part of my soul purpose.
So I know that you go, sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, just in terms of writing and examining life, kind of it's my thing. I think that is both therapeutic for me, and I guess when I share my thoughts about my discoveries with others, it helps them. And so to me, that intersection of what I love, and if it helps others, that feels really good to me. That feels like my soul purpose.
Did you have that writing ability from before you had children? Like as a child, was it writing something that you were drawn to?
In high school, I had, I think it was my sophomore year. I think I did fairly well in school, but I was always messing around and never taking anything seriously. And I had an English professor or teacher pull me aside, and she says, you're a writer. And, it's interesting where I went from mediocrity to really leaning in and trying to excel came because she recognized something I couldn't see in myself.
Yeah.
So she thought I could write. I never necessarily thought that, but somebody shined a light on me saying they believed in a part of me, and that caused me to believe in me a little bit. But, I look back on stuff I wrote 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I'm a little embarrassed. But I think that's just all part of our growth process, right?
Right. Yeah. And how that soul evolves, and I think you're right about saying that when someone believes in you, when you can't necessarily see that in yourself, it gives you the confidence, and it opens up pathways that I think are already there. And that's, I think, what I do as a coach as well. I'm not here to tell somebody what their journey is or what they should do, but I can see the potential in them that they can't necessarily see in themselves.
Yeah.
And it only takes one person, I found, to to really believe in somebody, to spark that inside them.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about you, but I find that when people tell me, like when you say what makes you happy and what makes you joyful, they don't know. And that's their first go-to answer is, I don't know what makes me happy. I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I actually don't know that you have one sole purpose. And I think I can see that with you as well. I think there's multiple.
I agree.
And we talk about having a soul contract as well within the program that I've learned through the CHECK program. So I think that you can have multiple soul contracts or soul purposes throughout your lifetime, and that changes. But I think the fun part of that is, and I think people don't see the fun part in that because they see it as being so serious, but and life is serious, especially when you've had loss in your life and that grief. But there's so much joy and so much fun in finding what that is and exploring the multiple things that could bring that soul purpose out in you. Is that what you've found in yourself?
Yeah. And as you describe that, I mean, my heart starts to pound. I think that resonates so deeply with me that I think it's just this, we are, each of us, onions that just have layers upon layers. And as we start to get closer to what is at our core, it just gets electrifying. And we do transform over time. Like I'd like to think I was the same guy I was 18, 20, 30 years ago, but I'm different. I'm changed, there's aspects of me that are the same, but I think our purpose evolves over time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it never, tell me about some of the things that you do that create joy in your life. Like what brings you that happiness and where does that soul purpose lie for you?
I think I have so many varied interests that it's really hard for me to lock in on just one thing. That at once is my strength and my weakness. I have to manage that because I have a lot of things that fascinate me. If I could live 2,000 years, I could be so happy. There's just not enough time in life to do all that I really want to do. But I think that some of the things that excite me are generally creation. I love to create things out of nothing. I love ambiguity, never scares me. I love going through the soup of the unknown and building things, whether that's companies or products or ideas. Those things really, really excite me. And, to that end too, when I sit down even on my blog and write, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I don't have an agenda. I just kind of listen to the universe. And if I'm thoughtful and meditative or prayerful, I seem to tap into something that helps me. So yeah, there's a scrambled answer.
No, that's okay. That's perfect. Are there times where you sit down to, say, for example, to write the blog and nothing comes through or nothing comes to you, and what do you do in those times?
I've learned to just either finish it and I know it's not now. Like I have lots of things I've written, but it's not the time. For some reason, I just hold back and I say, I might have finished a piece that I think when the time's ready, I'll know, and then I'll post it. Other times I'm not feeling it and then I drop it and I just move on to another thing and come back to it.
Yeah. Are there things that you do around your life? So for me as a CHECK practitioner, we talk about the 4 doctors. So Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. So we have to try and check in with each of those doctors every single day to create a balanced me or a balanced person. And within that balance, we still have the balance of yin and yang. So the male and the female within the body.
Yeah.
Are there things that you do? So I know there's certain things that I do. And one of those things at the moment is swimming in my swimming pool, even though it's like getting warmer here, but throughout winter, it was my challenge to swim each day. And I know that for me, I'm a better person when I do that, even though that there's often hesitation around getting in because it's so cold and it's so cold getting out. But I know that once I'm in there, that fulfills a certain part of my doctor. So that's part of my Dr. Quiet, my part of my meditation, because I can go in and not forget about the world, but it's just really focused time for me. Are there certain things that you do in your life that fulfill those doctors for you, or you've got a routine that you kind of follow? And I know that you, after Mitchell died, I know that you were visiting the gravesite frequently. I think you said it was daily at first, and then that dropped down to weekly. And I know recently I've watched and you've said that that's not happening as frequently now as it once was. Are there things that you need to do in a day that help bring up those creative juices or open those pathways for yourself?
You know, one of my favorite projects is sort of a deep meditation, and I call it my own deep work, where I'm studying aspects of what it means to be human. I'm studying, you know, Ram Dass and lots of others, Alan Watts, who just have brilliant things to say that open the lid to our awareness about what, who and what we are, and why we are shaped the way we are. And I think it's so fun and fascinating. In addition to that, that stuff really gets me excited. But I also have another sort of pet project that I'll probably release late this year. But and I've been working on it for a couple of years. But it's designed to bring people to the edge of human knowledge. You know, what we think we know about consciousness or astrophysics or so many fascinating ancient civilizations, and all of those just really excite me, because what I began to realize is we know virtually nothing about our place in the universe. And I think I love that statement that says, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And to me, I just love sitting on the edge of the unknown and peering out into the abyss and wondering what's out there. And, you know, it's just, that excites me. And to me, that just sort of sets me in a place of, I think, humility, in a sense, that I'm reminded that I don't know anything, and I can continue to be a student of all that life has to teach me.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. So that's my thing.
That's awesome. I didn't know that you were studying that, because I've only just discovered Ram Dass in the last couple of months through a guy named East Forest, whose music I got introduced to. Do you know East Forest?
Mm-mm.
I'll have to send you a link for it. Incredible music and incredible depth. And like, when I look at space and look at the ether and what's out there, I'm not starting to see, but I know that there's more than like what we see is just the bare minimum of what is filling that space. And I've been doing a lot of work on what we call soul retrieval and soul healing recovery work, and going inside and the depth of what we've got inside us. And I think people sometimes misinterpret what meditation can be about for them when they're looking to get enlightened or go to a higher place or go outside themselves, when they haven't really explored what's inside them. And I think that everything outside of us, that's all inside as well.
Yeah. Oh, I so agree. I think the amount of time I spend looking to the heavens, as it were, you know, all the things that inspire me about the universe and our place in it, there's the equal space inside of us that we often just don't spend that time looking inside and examining all the canyons and universes within us. And yeah, I agree. I think we need to spend time doing that more often than we probably do as a civilization.
Do you consider yourself a faithful person?
Yes.
Yeah. So when did that come about in your life?
Well, I mean, I was raised to construct faith and to believe in a higher power. It wasn't, I think, until I ran into some deep crucibles in my own life where the lights went out, and I had to start searching deeply for what is all the meaning of all of this. And so I think that, I think my faith continues to evolve, and my understanding of what lies beyond, it continues to grow and deepen and develop. One of my other favorite projects is this 1,000 Points of Light project. And the idea with that is that at some point in all of our lives, likely many times over our life, the lights will go out. Everything will go dark, and we will be in the darkest space in our life. And if we can just spend a moment and look metaphorically upward, regardless of your faith or if you have none, and begin to recognize those little points of light in the dark sky, and recognize that they've always been there. And those little points of light to me represent, you know, good things that have happened. Somebody might have been inspired to do something to bless my life. And that counts. Even a hardship like losing a job or having some misfortune in my life can sometimes send me down a path that I would have never chosen, but it was the best path for me. And so that project is another one I'm working on that to me, that's the internal work. The early one I mentioned looks to the heavens and all the things around us, and this Points of Light's about looking inward and recognizing that I may not know what's right around the corner 5 feet ahead of me, but if I look backward and I see that everything sort of fell into place, and maybe not perfectly, but at the end of the day, it all worked out, I can at least step into the unknown believing it's going to be all right.
that you're supported and that someone's holding you, or that there's a, would you call that like a destiny that is designed for you?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to whether it's predestination or foreordination, or so many ways we can look at that. But something magical is happening, and I think that when we all look back and examine our life, the more we look, the more we begin to see, and we can begin to recognize all these beautiful things that came into our life for our benefit. And
if someone's looking for that, like if you've had someone come to you and say, I'm in that really dark place, and I'm sure that you get that because I can see that comes through on the comments on your posts. And it's beautiful the way people are supporting each other on those. That's really good. But if you had someone come to you and say, I'm really in that dark place, looking up and seeing those things, what would your advice be to them in terms of being centered in that moment, to be able to look back and to recognize that has been a thread that's been throughout their life already? Like, what would you say to them around that? Because I think for me, I see people who are in that space and I'm trying to help them out of it. And I'm trying to be one of those lights that I don't see myself as holding their hand on that path, but I see myself as a guide and a spotlight to help them see that path. What advice would you give to someone who was in that space?
That's a great question. I seem to have those kind of conversations often with people. And, in regard to my blog, I can't possibly keep in touch with everybody.
Yeah.
And so in response to that desire to help people find the light in their lives, and is this points of light thing. And I built, workshops where I get people groups together and teach them kind of fundamental principles of looking for that light and the nature and disposition of those lights. It's not all bad. It's not all good. There's so many ways to begin to recognize. And so, if I can give them the framework of ways to look at their life, it's almost like that truism that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
And, that's really what happens is we just need to say, for me, here are 5 or 6 things you should look at in your life, how to recognize points of light in your life, those good things, and then seeing the connections between those. And I'm doing a terrible job answering your question, but I think like you can't do the work for them. Like, we all have to do the heavy lifting, and we can provide some guidance, but at the end of the day, it's our work and our work alone. And, so I guess the best thing I can do to serve people is to really listen deeply to what they have to say, and maybe just share an idea or two of where to look, where they need to go look and do the work themselves.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about the points in your life where you were really in those dark places. Would you be happy to share some of those and how you got through that?
Wow. Yeah. Just outside in my hallway, I wish I could take the camera and show you. I have basically a 12-foot long poster of all these points in my life, and where I had some particularly dark points. Sometimes I just had to muscle through it, just hang on for my dear life, emotionally, spiritually, and all that, just to see it through. Often in our suffering, we don't recognize the good that's happening. Sometimes they say our troubles don't burn us, they just burn what we're not. And they begin to reveal the deeper us. And so getting through that in the past has just been hanging on by dear life. But nowadays, when hard things happen, I begin to start to look back at the other things that are similar. Oh, I had something like this a decade ago. And if I can remember those points of light that kind of melded together to my benefit, I can begin to look for them in the present moment. And sometimes I can't see it. Sometimes those good things in our lives don't happen till later. So for me, if I can't make a connection that, hey, this is happening, and here's something that might give me some peace and solace or context or understanding, I can at least push pause on my emotions and say, just wait a little longer and it'll be clear. And so for me, I think that serves me, is by being patient in my suffering, I can find at least enough time to begin to see the picture more fully.
Yeah.
One other question, I think, or answer to that, is that when I look at things that trouble me, I think more than anything these days, I ask, what am I learning from this? What am I to take away from this experience? You know, the first impulse is, how the hell do I get out of here? How do I get out of this situation? Can I do something to improve my circumstance or release the pain? But if not, you know, I always ask, what am I learning? What can I take away from this?
Do you use that scale? So you mentioned that you look back at things in your past and you say, I've been through this 10 years ago and I got through that. Do you use that as a scale? So with clients, I will often say, on a scale of 1 to 10, look at the most extreme, and I can probably gather that you've had that extreme with losing Mitchell. And the way that you lost him, I think, was incredibly hard as well. So I would say to someone, think of your worst case scenario. And for me, that was losing my husband to cancer. But then I look at like that, there were elements of that that were positive as well. Probably not for him. And I have trouble talking to my children about this because they still aren't at the point of their journey where they can see the positives in that. But I can see that his passing was not my 10 out of 10 of the worst case scenario. So his passing for me was probably an 8, 7 or an 8, because there were much worse ways to pass that could have been a whole lot worse for me on that scale. So I use that and I say, well, okay, what's your worst case scenario? And let's see where today you're sitting at in comparison to that. And I think sometimes people are a little bit shocked with that because they go, oh, I don't want to think about the worst case scenario. But I think that puts it in perspective a little bit, and it brings them back to where they sit on that scale. Is it something that you, like, when you look back, you use that?
Wow, that's a really interesting model, that looking at how things could be worse, and perhaps finding solace that it could be worse and it's not, and being grateful for that. I haven't tried that, and I will. I love that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Why do you think Mitchell came into your life as your child? Why do you think this is my language around this, but because I believe that children and souls choose their parents to come through for their experience on earth. Why do you think, or do you think that Mitchell chose you and Natalie for a reason?
Oh, I do. You know, I think even just when I first met my wife, I remember it being a deeply spiritual experience. And I know everyone can make their own choices. Like, you know, we both made the choice to get together and create a family. But I think without a question that little boy came into our life for a very specific purpose. And I think it's unfolding to this day, that it wasn't just his life, but what's coming because of his life, the echoes that he's leaving behind. I think that was a divine plan. Absolutely.
What are those echoes? Would you care to elaborate on them? Like, dig deeper?
You know, it's interesting. While my son died of a very specific disease, Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, 95% of its readers have nothing whatsoever to do with that disease, but they're just people on earth trying to figure out their place in the universe and make sense of their own suffering. So I think that in examining our experiences with Mitchell has not only caused myself and my family to look more deeply at an examined life, but it's also inviting others to do the same. And I think that when we recognize we're not different, we're all the same. We all have insecurities and self-doubts, and we wonder and worry about things. And our worries can be different, but on balance, we're more similar than we are different. And I think that's where people read this and go, oh my gosh, that's me. Or I can identify with that feeling. And that's neat. That's beautiful. And I think that's the gift Mitchell left behind. And I would have done anything to save his life, but I couldn't do it. Nobody could. And so what now? Make the best of it. Make meaning out of it. Make something beautiful.
And what are you doing that? I know you said you've got a couple of different programs coming through. So are those influenced by what his journey taught you?
100%. I don't think there's a thing I'm trying to do in life that isn't born of my experience or informed by my experience with losing my son and raising him. But and it's, I think, also part of who I am anyway. But I think the fusion of who and what I am and what little Mitch taught me, it's showing up in everything I do.
Can you talk a little bit, because I love this idea that was again born from Mitchell's idea, I think you said, of Spark, the game.
Repeat that question again.
Can you tell us a little bit about the game that you've developed that was as a result of Mitchell's imagination and
Oh, yeah.
spark? Because I think, like, in a time where we've been blessed with COVID to be able to bring us, I think, together in lockdown with our families and try and navigate how far, not advanced, but how far away we came from that central unit for a lot of people at that family unit. We started to drift, and I know this with my own family because it's something that I still have to work on a daily basis with them, is putting the devices down and encouraging them to come together. And I think anytime that we can, we have an idea that, and yours is a beautiful idea, to bring people together and use that right side of their brain together to create something together, is like, the world needs that right now.
More than ever. Yeah, that was a fun discovery, that when my kids were little, I just play soundtracks in the background and make stories up, and the music would just inform the story. And halfway through the story, I would change the song to who knows what song, and the story would just pivot, and the kids would just laugh, and it was as though I would just take a zipper and unzip the ceiling of our home, and the walls fell to the earth, and we were everywhere. We traveled across the universe. We had amazing adventures. In fact, it wasn't helpful in putting the kids to sleep, and because they'd get all excited and they'd be arguing about who was going to be the protagonist. And I found that we'd do it on trips. We'd drive, and I'd just play music, and all you needed was a little music and your mind, and things would just happen magically. I started doing it with employees. We'd be driving long distances to film shoots and whatnot. And I had a guy I hired as the CEO of one of my training companies, and I just, he was maybe almost old enough to be my dad. I said, start telling a story, and he did. And he's like, I'm not a storyteller. And he is. We all were, right? Because when we were little kids, what would mom and dad do? They would give us toys. And what would we do with the toys? We'd create stories. Every one of us, with very, very few exceptions, were just natural storytellers. And that part of us falls asleep. So then I started coming up with this idea a few years ago about how to turn it into something that would bless many lives and families. And so we created this game, Spark, the magic of storytelling. And it's been really fun and gratifying to hear parents and people have no idea, even about my story, how it's blessed their lives, and how they're getting around the table and creating stories and traveling across great spaces without ever leaving their living room or their kitchen table. And so that's fun. That was kind of an unexpected discovery along the journey. And I hope it continues to bless a lot of lives, because you're right. Technology gets in the way. So many things get in the way. All the things that were meant to liberate us are binding us down in thought and in action, and we're just being trapped by digital devices rather than liberated by them.
Did you realize that when you were doing that with the children when they were young, that you were activating certain parts of their brain that would would develop and encourage growth?
Totally. Yeah, I wasn't lost on me that was what was happening. And they would, I'd turn the mic over to them to tell stories. They were so cute and sometimes incredibly sophisticated for how tiny they were. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was fun, but it was more meant to just be a delight rather than an education. But I knew it was doing both. Yeah,
because you're tapping into those senses. So you're tapping into the auditory as well as the vestibular and the verbular, the speaking and then the actions, because you get involved, so the movement happens. So that flow, from my perspective as a corrective exercise coach and a CHEK practitioner, that taps into certain pathways in the brain that encourage development and growth and keep those parts of the brain alive.
Yeah, amen.
Play.
And we can reactivate those years later if right? And so I found that with adults too. They're like, I'm not a storyteller. And I'm like, you just wait. And it happens, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I find with your coaching as well. So we talk about the chakra systems. Have you heard of the chakras in the body? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the root chakra is oftentimes where I find people are most blocked or most troubled. And the root chakra houses their safety and security. So I go back and I take them through a journey of what happened in their childhood and how they felt in their childhood and the things that helped create that safety and stability around them. And oftentimes that comes from parents, both parents, like most times. Some people are not quite as blessed as others, but so if they're having trouble in their adult life, I take them back and find or help them uncover where their safety and security was in their childhood, and how can we bring that back into their lives now?
Mm.
I think that storytelling is a huge part of that, because
Yeah.
as children, we don't understand the difference between what's reality and what's not reality, really, until we're about 8 years old, until that brain starts to switch over into the left side to be more dominant. And I think in our education systems, some education systems are great that they do understand that and they encapsulate that with their teaching and with the way they present learning opportunities to children. But computers and mainstream generally don't acknowledge that enough. And I think bringing that back into adults' lives and tracing that back to their childhood, they feel like they become a child again when they're doing those things and when they're telling those stories. But you've just got to open that doorway a little bit, and you've got to find that doorway that opens that opportunity for them. And I think Spark is, like, from what I've seen, it's a fantastic way of doing that.
Definitely. I want to make one other comment too about storytelling. Is one of the aspects of that game that I'm working on is, in the same way, when you sit down from an entertainment perspective and tell stories, and we can all create them, and when they experience how they can be transported by a simple story in a room or that we create on our own, we're creating stories every moment of every day in our lives. And I'm starting to work on material that's going to talk more about the stories we tell ourselves. Yes, that was fun, but now what stories are you creating every day that either excite you or suppress you? And, are we aware of those? And we can have the power to start shaping those stories to our betterment rather than our detriment. So that's one of the things that I'm leaning in toward, maybe a more adult look at Spark rather than kid-centric. And I, by the way, I also think that from a mental health perspective, even youth these days deal with depression on unprecedented levels because we've got this, asymmetrical relationship with people. We think we know them, and we're depressed because we're comparing ourselves to what, their high points with what we perceive as our low points all the time. And I know none of that's new, but I'd like to figure out how within my sphere of influence to help even teenagers reshape their stories to their betterment. So.
Yeah. I don't think it's new, but I think it's magnified by certain things that we're doing and not doing in our lives today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we can blame social media for a lot of that, but we can also need to take responsibility for that as parents.
Yeah.
And what we do and what example we set for our children as well.
Yeah.
And how we bring that into our own lives.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you another interesting question. Do you think you can find joy in grief?
100%. I think they can coexist. They're not the same, but yes, you can find joy in grief. And I think one of the great disservices we do ourselves accidentally. I remember one time we had left the cemetery just before Christmas and we were heading home. That's one of my favorite seasons. It's Mitchell's favorite season. And I was driving home and I remember going up to our driveway. This started to snow and we were listening to Christmas music and we were just at the cemetery. And I had this moment of joy. This was like a year after, the December after he passed. And then I immediately felt like I needed to box that joy up and put it away because I hadn't suffered enough. Yeah. And so I understood for the first time what so many people have talked about, which is I feel guilty for being happy when I'm sad. And the thing is, no, you can be both. You can I'll carry grief the remainder of my days, but I can also surround that by joyful moments. And in a way, it almost makes that cancer of grief begin to shrink a little bit the more I surround it and smother it with joyful moments. But I don't mean smother to hide away grief, because I think you have to look at it and experience it and ball it out for as long as you need to do it. But I think that joy can definitely coexist with grief. It must.
It must. Yeah. Do you think the joy makes the grief more meaningful?
Explain that.
Do you think it gives more purpose to why you go through the grief process when you can find joy in other places? That, like you said, when you surround the grief with joy, you're not trying to it's not like if grief was the light, and we know that that's oftentimes it's not, but if grief was that light, we're not trying to put that light out, but we're trying to find purpose for why we have that grief.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. And I think to me, as I've examined, I used to, in the beginning of Mitchell's journey, talk about the pursuit of happiness. And then I began to stumble into writings that suggested in research that said the very pursuit of happiness will thwart happiness. That
Yes.
the way to find true joy and happiness is by searching for meaning and purpose. And though I was already seeking meaning and purpose, I began to strip away the search for the happiness, because happiness is a byproduct of meaning and purpose. If we go for happiness sake, it's illusory, it's fleeting, it's sort of like the junk food of the soul. I go to watch a movie, and not that those are bad, they're fun, but if all I do is consume every moment of my waking life doing things that make me immediately happy, but not deeply happy, I'll find myself out of shape emotionally and spiritually, because then I can't weather the next storm. I can't brace for impact of another disaster in my life. And we'll probably all have many of them throughout our lives, unfortunately. But yeah, I think searching for meaning and purpose is really the way to find lasting joy and happiness. And that in itself is a healing agent to that aspect of grief.
Yeah, I agree. You said you would like to speak about the examined life. Can you unpack that a bit for me and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think often and I don't blame people for thinking the thoughts they think. I mean, I recognize those in myself. And, in fact, whenever anybody says anything to me, even if I don't identify with it today, I always ask myself, how is that exactly me? And what can I learn like that? I see myself in everything people are saying. And so, but when I hear people say, well, why I did everything right, I did all the things that either God or the universe asked me to do, I was totally obedient, and I'm still getting, taken down to my knees. And I think it's because we don't examine life. We ask the questions that I think part of our standard education being humans, I wish we were taught how to live an examined life, how to pause a moment and say, yeah, how could I ever think I would be the only human exception to suffering? It happens all around us. We watch the news, but because that's other people, we see it behind a sterile screen. We don't identify that, everyone suffers, the world suffers. And so if we don't live an examined life and begin to look at the world around us and realize we're not special enough to not have suffering, like we're all going to suffer. I think we end up wasting a lot of time and energy asking the wrong questions. Instead of why me, why is this happening to me? Well, of course all of us, we're all going to suffer. The real question is, what am I getting out of this? And to me, that's the essence of an examined life. And, I think that in a way, I identify a lot with what you describe with your work. And I admire you for that, because that's the deep soul work that helps people find their way to higher ways of thinking and acceptance of the things we can't control. So.
Do you think that people sometimes would look back, like yourself and like me, who have had this kind of journey, and realize that they were actually happy in parts where they didn't think they were happy?
I've got a story I'm going to publish soon, and it was about how I miss the suffering. Paradoxical as that sounds, I miss that feeling, even though I was in anticipatory grief or in grief, actual like post-death grief. There were some really beautiful moments. The most tragic parts of my life are also the most beautiful.
Yeah.
I can say that with utter confidence.
I'm going to ask another question that, again, is quite deep. How do you think, or do you think, parts of your childhood set you up for what was your future, or prepared you for, or gave you, or did they give you the strength that you would need later on? Or are there any parts of your childhood from that? Because I know that you've briefly mentioned in one of the posts that I just read that I think you had a stepfather, and that wasn't such a great experience for you.
That was awful. Yeah, I think that without reservation, everything adds up to where we are. I think everything we experience, directly or indirectly, prepares us in ways that only upon deep reflection and doing the deep work of an examined life can we start to see, oh, that really awful thing made it a lot easier for me to deal with this new thing. and now I'm a little stronger. And I think there's that great Jewish proverb that says, don't pray for lighter burdens, pray for a stronger back. And I think that we'll never escape suffering. So if we can just look back and say, yeah, that prepared me and I'm actually stronger, I can handle that. Sometimes it's a mind thing. It's the ability to say, I'm tougher than I think. And sometimes just by looking backwards at some of our early experiences, we're saying, I've been through this, I can do this.
Can you remember any specific experiences from your childhood?
Yeah,
examples of that?
One that comes immediately to mind is that at various points in my life, I was extremely lonely. And, even like in high school, I was student body president, I was popular, everyone knew who I was, and it doesn't matter. But at the time, I felt super lonely. Everyone was my friend, but no one was my friend. Weekends, I learned to just be alone. And I wondered why, what's wrong with me? Because I don't seem to connect. And I think I always wanted to connect on a deeper level. Anyway, I look back on that early in elementary, junior high, and high school, where I felt alone. And I learned not to need anything from anybody to feel whole. So now fast forward 25 years and I lose one of my precious children. And now I'm trying to deal with the darkest moment of my life, and learning how to be alone and not need people to give me words to feel better gave me great strength. I've learned, and I think there was that one point I took my youngest son to a grief camp. He was a young boy and he had a little red balloon and he let it go in the air. And it was like a day camp, and it was really a sweet experience. And as I saw the balloon go, the words came to me, after all that's said and done, the journey of grief is traveled by one. Yeah. And, my wife and I, we both lost our kid, but the reality is I'll never know her suffering like she knows her suffering, and she'll never know mine. And I don't need her to know mine, and I don't need to know, but we just need to be there for each other and to love each other through that. But we don't need each other to give us save me, because it's really kind of what Shakespeare said, right? The patient must minister unto himself. We have to do that work.
You have to save yourself. You're the only one who can save you.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself in your children?
Yeah. How often do I? Every one of them. And I tell my son, Ethan, man, if I was your age, you'd be my best friend. I love that guy, and I have so much in common with him. And in fact, he's a better version than I had ever hoped to be at his age.
Yeah.
Same with my son, Wyatt, and Laura Ashley. Yeah, I see them in me and them a lot.
What do you hope?
Differentiation, though. I also see enough of them being themselves, and I think it's beautiful and marvelous.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to create mini me's. I just marvel at who they are.
It's like a patchwork quilt that you see bits and pieces if you come through at certain times, and you hope that those are the right times with the right elements of you.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've just welcomed our second grandchild into the world.
Congratulations.
Thank you. What kind of world do you hope to improve? Or do you hope to improve in certain elements of the world for your grandchildren, not necessarily your children? What would you give, or what would you say to your grandchildren?
What do I hope to pass on to my grandchildren?
Perhaps that's a better way of saying it, yeah.
100% the tools to live an examined life. The learning to ask the hard questions, the impossible questions, and to be able to, and to surround themselves with people that are courageous and honest enough to give us real reflection in our lives. Because we can't see our bed head in the back of our hair. We need people around us to give us reflection so we be the best possible us. And lastly, to just not take everything so personally as though they have deficits. We all have, things to work on, and that doesn't make you any less of a person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We're going to wrap up. If there's anything you wanted to leave with our audience, what would that be? Or where could they find you? Or what would you like to point them towards in terms of your businesses?
I think my most important work is Mitchell's Journey right now. And that's at mitchellsjourney.org, or you can find it on Facebook. And, I think what's so beautiful about that isn't, I marvel at watching what other people do to help each other. somebody will make a comment and you'll see other people coming to at least empathize and say, I see your pain and I care. And I think that's so beautiful. I love watching that. So it's almost a community that's feeding itself in many regards. And I've seen wonderful friendships across the globe happen because of that group. So I love that space, and I would recommend people look at that. And then I have my parent company's stonewell-global.com, and that's where I do all of my other work. And so if people are interested in learning about my Points of Light project or Spark or other things I'm doing, that's the gateway to see all the other things I'm trying to work on. So
awesome.
And in parting thoughts, I just think, I think that maybe we talked about this a minute ago, but just the idea about don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. And in those tough questions, I think, are the deepest answers, so.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Christopher.
Thank you for having me.